dangerous, isn't it, letting somebody else introduce you, because they always big you up far too much. So you can bring that introduction down a bit. Jenny Brown. I work with Friends International, which is a Christian organisation helping churches welcome and integrate international students into their churches in this country. And I run a training scheme. So it is largely people in their 20s or early 30s. But as Jamie said, I guess I'm coming here today as somebody who took time out of another job to take on the role of living with my mum and caring for her in her last years while she had dementia. That was the reason I went to live with her, because she needed to be not on her own anymore. And then later on she developed cancer as well. So I was, kind of effectively her living carer for 4.5 years before she passed away, which is a number of years ago now. So actually it's been interesting to sort of be reflecting back and remembering some of those days and some of the things that we as a family learnt through that time. So we're thinking tonight about caring and being cared for. And I do want to just say that I'm offering what I'm offering tonight as my reflections on our experience. I'm not an expert carer. I haven't done heaps of research on the subject. I'm just offering our experience and some of my reflections theologically on that experience. Everybody's experience is different. Everyone's experience of caring or of dementia or of that fourth age, which as I understand it is defined as when we are becoming more dependent, as we become more frail and we become more dependent upon others. That's my understanding of that term. And everybody's experience of that is different. So tonight I'm just reflecting a little bit on our experience and thinking, what's the Bible got to say about it? Just looking at stats, and I've got Keith sitting here, so he may correct my stats as well as John's. But what I found out was that 13.6 million unpaid carers in the UK today. So that's the sort of, I don't know exactly when that was dated, but a lot of people caring, unpaid carers. And perhaps an easier figure to get hold of is that 3 out of 5 of us will be a carer at some stage. 3 out of 5 of us will be a carer at some stage, which is interesting, isn't it? A good number of us. But I guess as well, if you add on to that, a good number of us will be cared for, as John was saying. Probably the majority of us will be cared for at some stage in life. So whether we become a carer or we're cared for, I think we're all going to experience this from one side or the other or both. Just a question to mull over in your mind. Let's see if we've got any knee-jerk responses. Can you think of any characters in the Bible who were carers? Anybody spring to mind? Let's just see what we... Ruth, good one. Ruth, yeah.
The Apostle John.
The Apostle John, yes. Who did he care for?
Jesus' mother.
Jesus' mother Mary, yes. All right, maybe others. We'll see as we go through. I guess you could say, if you're thinking about caring for younger age, every mum in the Bible was a carer for the younger age, and there's lots of similarities, although not all the same issues. Perhaps we'll think of other examples as we go. Well, the one I wanted us to think about tonight is actually King David. King David was a carer, although he was perhaps the most significant king of Israel. We wouldn't immediately come to mind to say his name as we're thinking about carers in the Bible, but let's take a look at 2 Samuel chapter 9. I love this story. I'm going to read the chapter to you. Do follow it along if you wish. 2 Samuel chapter 9, or just listen. So it's after David has become king and he's been victorious. He's in sort of, if you like, the prime of his successful monarchy. David asked, "Is there anyone still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They called him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "Your servant," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is in the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-debar." So King David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down and paid him honor. David said to him, "Mephibosheth." "Your servant," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "for I will surely show you the kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" When the king summoned Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "I've given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants to Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table, and he was crippled in both feet. So I love the story because here's David, who's established as king in Israel, and what most new kings did was they killed off the family of the previous kings so that there wasn't any threat, anybody threatening his position. Well, King David does the opposite. He looks for somebody in the family of the previous king to show kindness to show the kindness of God to. Because David had experienced the kindness of God through Jonathan, he now looks for an opportunity to show the kindness of God to Jonathan's family. And that a grandson of Jonathan, the son of Jonathan, the grandson of Saul, who would be in line to the throne, Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth is Jonathan's disabled son. It says he's disabled in both feet. So David takes him home and effectively takes responsibility for him. You could say David becomes his carer. I'm sure David had lots of help at home, unlike some of us. But he becomes effectively his carer. Now, I know that's caring for someone not elderly, someone younger, but nonetheless someone who's needing care. And I just want to draw some parallels from that. The first one is that caring, the role of being a carer, is a way of responding to God's kindness to us. So as we care for somebody else, it's a way of us responding to the kindness that God has shown to us. And God's kindness comes to us how? Largely it comes through other people, doesn't it? David had experienced the care of Jonathan, his loyalty and so on. And for us too, the care that we've received through life largely comes through the actions of other people. So for me, as I cared for my mum, I saw in that a beautiful symmetry. John Wyatt talks about the symmetry of both ends of life. And I really felt that and saw that as I was looking after mum. The care that she gave to me in my first years, I was able to give something similar to her in her last years. There was a kind of reflection, a symmetry of that. What she had done for me, I could now do for her. It was an expression, if you like, of gratitude to her and also to God for what she had done for me. So things like providing food, it's the same, isn't it, whether it's a child or whether it's an elderly person. Washing her body, helping her to clean her teeth when she'd forgotten how to do that. Going with her to the doctors. Getting up in the night. Protecting her from harm. Worrying for her when she was ill. Remembering things for her. She had done all of those things for me in earlier years. Now all I was doing was returning the favour, if you like. And it seems that God has ordained life such that we are, generally speaking, dependent upon others at the beginning of life. And then we come back to that stage at the end of life where we're again dependent upon others. And both Debs tomorrow and John, and we'll be talking more about that sense of moving into a period of dependence, which is what we're talking about in the fourth age. One of the things that we experience. And I think God has something to say to us through that dependence at the beginning of life, but then also a dependence at the end. It's not an accident. It's not something necessarily to resist and to run from and have as the biggest fear. They say surveys amongst people in the UK at least, that is our greatest fear about getting old, is that we become dependent upon other people. Whereas actually it seems God has ordained that. So perhaps we shouldn't resist it so much, but rather be open to it, embrace it, and see what God is saying to us through it. I think other cultures in the world don't have so much of a problem with that. They're much more used to the idea of being interdependent upon one another. So they don't have such a dread of it as I think we do in our culture. Matthew 25, again, it's not directly talking about care of the elderly, but I think there's lots applicable from this passage. It's a familiar one. I won't read the whole chapter. It's where Jesus is... I'll just read from verse 34. Let me read that bit. It's the sheep and the goats passage, basically. So when Jesus is telling the story of a king who... the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink." Well, that does apply to the fourth age. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go and visit you?" And the king will reply, "I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." And I think that really applies to this topic of caring and being cared for. Whatever you did to the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. So all those carers across the country who are behind closed doors caring, God sees that. And from his perspective, Jesus says, well, when you do that for others, you're doing it for me. Just think about that with the person sitting next to you in twos or threes. I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 minutes just to think together. What difference does that make to how we regard the role of a carer? If Jesus is saying, when you do this for somebody else, you're effectively doing it for me. That's how he regards it. How does that affect the way we regard the role of a carer? And how might that also affect the way we might regard being cared for ourselves? The fact that Jesus says when someone does this, it's as if they're doing it for me. What difference does that make to the role of how we see the role of the carer and how we see the prospect of being cared for? Just talk in pairs or threes, just a couple of minutes. Okay, any thoughts on that? You've just perhaps begun to talk about it, but any immediate thoughts? What difference does that make to how we think about the role of a carer to start with? The fact that Jesus says, when you do that for someone else, the least of the brothers, you do it for me. What difference does that make to how you view the role of a carer? We haven't got time for lots of responses, but I'd love to hear 2 or 3. Thank you. It's a great commission, isn't it? It's a one we should elevate the role, yes, to value it. Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts?
It doesn't depend on a thankful response. And I mean, that's true of God to us. God's kindness to us started long before we were aware of it. And for many of us, it may have been almost a lifetime before we noticed it and gave thanks.
Yes.
And I was just saying to my companion here, the fact that a dementia patient, for instance, is never going to say thank you is one of the hardest bits to bear.
Yeah, yes. Yes, that's right. The way they previously would have responded has perhaps changed, and they may not say thank you. They may not respond in that way. But this helps us to realise that there is someone who is appreciating it. I'm sure the person themselves is appreciating it in their own sort of way, but we can't fathom that. We can't necessarily understand that. But God is saying, no matter what, whether they can say thank you or they can't say thank you, God is appreciating it. He's receiving it. Yeah.
I think it's changed your mindset of asking God to show you someone how he sees them.
To ask God to show you how he sees the person that you're caring for. Yes.
And then the being cared for, and I can't quite imagine that just yet. Do you think, but I did think when you were saying, well, I've been kept such very high standards for my children, of caring, but also I think it's being able to be humble enough to allow somebody to wash my feet.
Mm.
Jesus.
That's right. So Jesus is the humility to allow ourselves to be cared for. Because actually, what Jesus is effectively saying is when you're in that position of being cared for, you're my substitute. You're substituting for me, he's saying. Because the one caring for you is doing that as if doing it to me. So you're now in a position where you're substituting for Jesus as you are the one being cared for. Well, I don't know about you, but that sets a whole new light on the prospect of being cared for.
It's about showing the need to care for the vulnerable, those who can't care for themselves, and the need to see the face of Jesus in all those who we look at.
Yes, thank you. It becomes that caring actually then, I think it's, from this passage, it's a strong thing to say, but it becomes an act of worship. It can become for us an act of worship. Depends on our attitude. But as we come to care for the other person, this is now an act of worship. The time when I was most struck by that was when I'd showered my mum, and I was then drying her feet, washing her feet and drying her feet, and she hated having a shower. Apparently there's something connected with dementia, that often dementia patients don't like water on their skin. And certainly my mum really hated having a shower. It was always a point of tension and stress. And when we got to the point of getting her out of the shower and she was basically dry and I was just drying her feet, that was when everything calmed down. And she was still able to say thank you to me. And at that point was one of the points when she said, "Oh, you're so good, Jen. You're so good to me, Jen," which she'd always say it at that point. And as I dried her feet, it did become for me almost like a ritual of saying, "Lord, I'm worshipping you as I'm doing this. I'm doing it for my mum, but Lord, I'm also doing it for you." And it sort of, again, it becomes a sort of reflective thing, knowing that Jesus washed his disciples' feet. He chose that very thing to do for his disciples as a way of serving them. And then he said that was an example for us. So there's all sorts of equivalents of washing somebody's feet. Probably wiping someone's bottom is another equivalent of that. That actually, even in that act of the very basic things of life, can be turned into an act of worship. Bodily care of someone who can't do that for themselves anymore. We do it for them. And Jesus says, when you do that for somebody else, it's as if you're doing it for me. It becomes an act of worship. And I would take it, that's sort of one step, in a sense, caring as a way of responding to God's kindness to us. It's a sort of giving thanks. It's a thank you, and it's a worship, can be an act of worship. This, I would say, is going sort of another step, which is saying it's actually reflective of God's character and reflective of the gospel itself. So I've popped a question up there. Perhaps we'll do this one sort of together. Think about the various ways of caring for another person who is maybe physically disabled or frail or mentally frail. How does that caregiving reflect aspects of what Christ has done for us? How does that caregiving, where can you see aspects of the gospel in that role? I'll give you an example so show you what I mean. It's sort of continuing the last point, but is going a step beyond it. So one of the ways in which caring for Mum when she had dementia, it involved providing a safe space for her. They say that the biggest problem for people with dementia is not actually their memory. It's the responses of all the people around them. That's their biggest problem. Because other people, most of us, we don't know how to respond to someone with dementia. It requires a kind of counterintuitive response. Our knee-jerk response is to sort of remind them of things or correct them when they get things wrong. Whereas actually that's the worst way to respond to someone with dementia. They don't need that. So to provide a safe environment for Mum when she had dementia was one of the things that was my role. I saw that as a very important part of my role of caring for her, was to try to provide a safe space. So I was a vicious gatekeeper on the front door as to who would come and visit her and who wouldn't, because there were some visitors that were great and they got it just right. There were other visitors that really caused more trouble than they were worth, simply because they weren't quite used to how to be with someone with dementia. So providing a safe place, to me, that mirrors what God does for us. God is our refuge. God is our safe place. He provides a safe place for us. It's part of what the gospel is. Providing a stable presence to reduce her anxiety. One of the things I found difficult, particularly in the early days, and I had to come to terms with it, I struggled with it, was that because if Mum knew everything about what I was doing, where I was going, that would cause her a lot of anxiety. So if I was living, to begin with, she was fine to be left on her own for a short while. But if I said to her, I'm going to London, that would cause her to be very anxious. If I told her I'm going shopping, she was quite happy to receive that. It was not a problem, because she knew where I was going and she knew I'd be back. So there came times when I actually didn't tell her the truth. And I'm a good Christian girl, was brought up in a good Christian home. Always tell your mum the truth, never mind everybody else, but your mum is the last person to lie to. And there were times when actually I didn't tell her the truth. I did tell her something that wasn't true. So I'd say if I was going to London for the day, I knew she was going to be well cared for. I knew there was a carer coming or my sister was coming, but she couldn't take on board all of that information. If I just said I'm going to London, she would fret and cause a lot of anxiety that was completely unnecessary. So I'd say I'm just going shopping, and I'd write it down. And getting over that barrier of kind of not telling her the truth was hard, but it was a way of protecting her. It was a way of providing a safe space for her. Because I realised there was a bigger truth in operation, protecting her from an anxiety that wasn't necessary. And if I didn't do that, it would actually come to be abusive. If I knew there was a way of avoiding the anxiety for her and I didn't put that into place, I regarded that as being a bit abusive. So providing a safe place and reducing the anxiety. Remembering. God remembers us. And he remembers for us, even when we don't remember him. He remembers us. And Mum used to say, Jen's my memory. So part of what I did, part of my role, was to remember things on her behalf. I used to say to her, well, you're my memory about my childhood, because I can't remember things back then. So you remember those things, and I remember the things that happened not long ago. God remembers us, even when we don't remember who he is. Laying down our life. There is an element, isn't there, of being a carer where your things get put aside. Your social interactions, your interests, your life is put on one side for a while as you effectively lay down your life to care for the other person. That's a very gospel reflective thing to do, isn't it? Fighting for justice on their behalf. I don't actually remember occasions when I needed to do that, but I know some carers do need to fight for justice, for the rights of the person that they're caring for. Fighting for justice on their behalf. Again, it's a gospel-orientated thing to do. Providing food, protecting from harm, encouraging her to do what was uncomfortable but necessary. Exercises, diet, having a shower. God does that with us as well. It's part of his discipling and disciplining of us. He knows what's good for us, even if we don't want to do it. And there's something redemptive about caregiving. Somehow by being with her and by giving her the opportunity of relationship at that stage of life, even though her mental capacities were failing, there's something very redemptive about that. It's like kind of renewing her, giving her a life back again, which I think reflects the gospel. Showing characteristics of tenderness or gentleness, humility or compassion is reflective of God's character. So I do think that caring is a way of actually kind of living out the gospel, of demonstrating the gospel, and I would even say proclaiming the gospel through what we do and the way that we do it. So if someone said to me, why are you doing what you do? One of the reasons would be because Jesus has done this sort of thing for me. He's laid down his life for me. He's created a safe space for me. He stands up for me. He protects me from harm. Going back to King David is a kind of type of Christ, isn't he? He points forward to Christ. We know he defeats the enemies of God's people, and in that he's Christ-like. He rules, doing what is right and just, and in that he is Christ-like. And here in this chapter 9, he cares for the vulnerable and the weak. That also is Christ-like. So, as being a carer, David is also pointing to Jesus. And then thirdly, caring as a way of honouring the other, affirming their God-given dignity. And in the fourth age, as people become more in need of other people's care and less able to care for themselves, become more frail, both physically and perhaps mentally, there can be a great loss of dignity. And I think that's part of what we dread, isn't it? When we dread being dependent on other people, part of that dread is because we dread the loss of dignity. Well, if we go back to that story about David and Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth, as someone who was disabled, lame in both feet, by his society at the time, well, he was powerless. He couldn't help himself. He was left vulnerable. He couldn't farm the fields. Therefore, he couldn't provide for himself. He was powerless. He was useless. As well as not being able to farm the fields, he couldn't fight as a soldier. So nationally, as his society would regard him as a pretty useless person. And of course, he was shamed. His disability at that time will have brought him shame, and he will have been marginalised and isolated. How does David restore his dignity? He does it in several ways. First, he takes the initiative. It's David that sought out Mephibosheth. It wasn't that he came knocking at the door. David sought him out deliberately, sent for him, found out about him, brought him, had him brought to him. He takes the initiative. He restores his land to him, his inheritance, and then he brings Mephibosheth into his own house, not just into his house and into kind of the side wing or the basement where he didn't need to have any contact with him. No, he brings him right to his own table, his own dining table. And it says in verse 11 that he brings him to eat at my table as one of my sons. He will be like one of the king's sons. Well, if that doesn't reflect the gospel, I don't know what does. Restoration of relationship, protection, provision, inclusion, adoption. It all reflects the gospel, and it is all a way of David honouring him and giving him back his dignity. And I do feel strongly that caring gives people back their dignity. Our society values shape what we think life is all about. We value achievement in our society, we value productivity, we value the intellect, we value someone's ability to reason, to remember, to give a sort of coherent argument about something, to hold an opinion, to know what's going on around them. Well, when those capacities are lost, is our life then without value? Is it without meaning? It's often said of people with dementia, there's all sorts of phrases and words around that condition that are very demeaning and very robbing people of their dignity. A life not worth living. They're just a shell of their former self. It's a meaningless life. These are very derogatory and demeaning terms. I would say that living with Mum, I realised that someone with dementia is far from stupid. That's another phrase people sometimes use of people with dementia. They're far from stupid. They've been using and developing themselves before we realise they have dementia, before they realise they had dementia probably. They've been putting together lots of coping mechanisms for the fact they're losing their memory or their mental capacity. And they've actually put lots in place. So far from being stupid, they've actually developed their own coping mechanisms and strategies. There comes a point when those break down, but they're far from stupid. They just can't remember the information. They don't have the information to hand that we have. Someone likened it to walking along the edge of a cliff in a fog. You can't see more than 6 inches in front of you or 6 inches behind you. It's a very scary and difficult walk to walk when you can't remember what's just happened a few minutes ago. It's like being in a total fog. And yet they are living with that and they're coping with that remarkably well. The Bible tells us something very different to those values of our society. The Bible tells us that a human being is created in the image of God. There is an imprint, there is a reflection of God in every human being. And that gives us great dignity. And that never goes. As we're created in the image of God. And so every person bears that imprint of God. And every human being has been given the breath of God, the gift of life, deliberately gifted to them every day by God. It's God that gives us that breath. How then could that human life, created in the image of God and gifted with the breath of God, how could that be meaningless? We may struggle to understand, we may struggle to bring meaning, but I think life is meaningful simply because it is. The fact that breath has been given by God today is sufficient to give that person dignity. I think we have no right, and we're simply not in a position to declare the life of somebody else meaningless. I came to the conclusion that that is a contradiction in terms, a meaningless life. If it is a life, it has meaning. As I say, the life may not be the same as it was. It's changed dramatically, and it's hard to be a carer for somebody with dementia. But their life has meaning because it still is. So as we give our time and our energy to care for another, we're affirming their God-given dignity. We're saying that they're worth it. We're agreeing with God about them as we care for them. The question's up there already. Let's just take another couple of minutes just to talk with the person next to you. In what ways can a carer honour the cared for person and restore their dignity or affirm their dignity? They might be very simple things, might be very practical things. What can a carer do to underline or restore the dignity of the person that they're caring for? Just a couple of minutes chatting with one another. Shall we share a few thoughts? I'd love to hear what you think. How can the carer honour the cared for person and affirm their dignity, or restore their dignity. Any thoughts on that? I'd love to hear. Let's have several contributions.
Listening to them.
Yeah, listening to them. Taking time, might need more time, but to listen well to them. Yeah. Know that they have something, assume they have something they want to share. Yeah.
Instead of doing everything for them, encouraging them to do the little things that they can for themselves.
Yes. Empowering them where they are able to do things, rather than just doing it quickly yourself because it will be done quicker or better, but giving them certain things they can do. Yeah, great.
Making things feel normal. So I cared for my dad recently when he was nursing down, and wiping his bottom but talking to him about cricket at the same time.
Great. I love that. Yeah.
So this is very normal and we're not making just cricket about it.
Yes.
He wiped mine when I was a baby.
Yeah.
I wiped his.
To normalise things. In case you didn't hear, I'm just repeating what a friend at the back said. So she was saying she was caring for her dad and she was wiping his bottom and was talking about the cricket at the same time. This isn't a big deal, Dad. You know, you did it for me. I'm just doing it for you. And who do you think is going to win the test match? Yeah. Lovely. I love it. Normalise it. Yes, you were going to say something.
Being prepared to have the hard conversations sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, be prepared to have the hard conversations sooner rather than later. Yeah. Because the capacity to be able to have those conversations may be slipping away. So good to talk about the difficult things or the things that you really want to say or the things that you need to organise together earlier on. Yeah. Thank you.
Triggering memories.
Sorry?
Triggering memories.
Yes.
Especially using music and
Yes.
old things,
Yes.
photographs.
Yes. For someone, my experience with someone with dementia, you might be caring or you may be involved caring someone that's not got dementia, but for someone with dementia, and actually anything, triggering the memories of happy times. Looking at photos together, taking time to remember and tell the stories of years back. Music that is familiar and relaxing and triggers good memories. Yeah, thank you very much. That's true for all. This lady here was going to say something.
When you run into a difficulty, looking for solutions, not just pushing on with it being difficult.
Okay, yes.
The thing I have in mind is actually a blue toilet seat made all the difference.
Thank you. Looking for solutions, whatever those solutions might be, trying to resolve it such that it's not just going to roll on. Yeah, okay. Sometimes we can find the solution for something, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I found when I was caring for my dad with my family, speaking to him at his level, so not over him, speak about sustainability, but also allowing him to go at his pace. So we
Yes.
talked about later life, like earlier life. So it was fine that he wanted to read children's books.
Yep.
It was fine that he had cuddly toys.
Yep.
Before he couldn't go out and still take him out to eat and not being embarrassed, cats were a bit,
Yeah.
but he could still get pleasure from doing everyday things, he just needed support.
So sort of going with them where they're at.
It
And
had to be our attitude that changed, didn't
yeah.
worry us that he had lots of children's toys, if you like,
Yes.
things around, and he got pleasure from that, but it was almost like life going in verse.
Yes.
And
Thank
then,
you.
so he loved sort of his great grandchildren that were small and played ball with them, play
Yeah.
golf, whatever.
Yeah.
But it was countercultural that what was happening in the home or
Mhm.
with people.
Mhm.
You have to be quite single-minded
Yes.
to meet his needs and be confident that you knew who he was
Yes.
and to recognise that pleasure even when he couldn't say it.
Yes.
See it in his eyes.
So to sort of tune in to what brings the person pleasure or contentment and go with that,
Because you get that,
not imposing what you think they should need and want. Yeah.
you get that one moment when they suddenly say a sentence that
Yes.
because you've got them to that place that they can just go out.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. You said lots of things there. I'm just going to repeat a couple of bullet things. So not talking over them, about them and over them, but talking at their level, but at the same time not talking as if they are a child. They are an adult. They're an adult. They just have lost some capacities. So they haven't become a child again. There may be some similarities to what a child needs and the care a child needs, but they are an adult, and I think treat them as an adult, but speak at their level and allow them to decide what they want to do with, as much as possible. So if they want to read children's books, let them read children's books. Don't poo-poo it, Try to... I did a really helpful course on dementia from Contented Dementia Organisation, and one of the things they said is that the person you're caring for is the expert in them. So my job as the carer is to learn from them what works for them, and then to try to provide that and enable that. And that's going to be different for different people. But they're the expert about themselves, not me. I need to learn from them what's working for them and what's not. You get some I've got lots of experience in the room, obviously, I can see, yeah.
Yes, I think linked to that, a little bit of protection as well. My mother-in-law had dementia, my wife cared for her, and during that time, my mother-in-law lost her Down syndrome daughter. And asked about her, and my wife said that she died, and there was a sense of bereavement. But then the next day or whenever, she asked about her again, but she didn't take her through the sense of bereavement again, but simply said, but she's all right, she's much happier now than she's ever been, rather than regularly putting her through the grief process, which may not have lasted long, but nevertheless is real. So the bit of emotional protection as well.
Yes, and that's giving her dignity, isn't it? That you're not pushing her through that. Yes, that's such a wise thing to do. I had this a parallel with my mum when she was diagnosed with cancer, and I decided I'll tell her once. She said, I think we went to the hospital today, did we? I said, yes. She said, what was that about then? I said, oh, it was about the lump here you've got here. Oh, okay. What is it? I said, they've said it's cancer. Oh, okay. Am I going to die? Well, eventually, And actually, it was a lovely moment because I got upset at that point. I started to cry. And she suddenly was caring for me in that moment. The tables had reversed largely for me caring for her, but it flipped back in that moment. And she said, don't worry, Jen, God will look after us. And it was a very beautiful, beautiful moment. But the same thing the next day, she'd forgotten. So I didn't keep telling her. She doesn't need to keep hearing that news every day. Couple more things. I'd love to hear a couple more things before we just go into the last section and finish. And that's always a great way to shut people up, isn't it? When you say yours is going to be the last contribution.
You used a really interesting word, Jen, there. Beauty. It was a beautiful moment. And there is beauty in dignity.
Yes.
And I think that we'd be wise as church to try and help people find more beauty.
To look for that and to find it, to seek it, I think. That I'm not denying, and I do want to acknowledge that it's hard. And you don't always get the reflecting back. As this gentleman over there said, don't always get the thank you, so you don't always get the appreciation back. And that's one of the difficult things, very difficult things. And there's all sorts of other hard things about being a carer. But there is beauty in it. People think dementia is the worst thing in the world. Dementia isn't pleasant, and I'm sure for the person living with it, living through it, it can be very frustrating. But certainly for my mum and myself, it gave us time together that we wouldn't otherwise have had. And so in that, I'm grateful that we were able to have that opportunity. I guess another way of honouring the person is helping them to express their faith. And just touch on that for a moment. Whether they have been a person who's known the Lord or they haven't. But enabling them to kind of connect with God in a way that's appropriate for them. To provide ways for them to connect with God and relate to God. For us, that meant we just said a very simple grace at meals. We had a calendar on the table which Mum turned over every day, and it had a verse on it, so I'd read the verse out. She very often said nothing about it, but we just did it. We said, We had hymns, music, familiar hymns, which Mum appreciated. We did home communion, which she always said at the end of that. I knew she'd always say the same sentence after we'd had communion at home. She said, "Oh, I feel at peace now." She'd just say that one sentence and nothing much more. And we also did prayers every night at bedtime. Once I'd got her in bed, we'd say prayers. And that got shorter and shorter and shorter as the dementia went further on. She couldn't cope with very long prayers, but we just did a short prayer at bedtime. So as we care, I think we're partnering with God to provide, to sustain that gift of life that he has given them. And that gives us great dignity as a carer, because we're partnering with God in what he's doing. If he's given them life and breath today, and you're caring for them, you're partnering with God in what he's doing. And that gives you, the carer, great dignity. I would say, in a sense, that's what we call mission, isn't it? Sharing in what God is doing in the world. I think that's not a bad definition for mission. Well, that's what you're doing as a carer. You're sharing in what God is doing in that person's life. So you're involved in mission. Your life isn't sidelined. And this is my last sort of thought, really. Caring is a way of receiving God's blessing ourselves. So if we are a carer, it's a way of receiving God's blessing ourselves. And that is one of them. We're participating with God in the work he's doing in that person's life. Many people said to me, because I left my job in London, it was a busy job, it was a very fulfilling job. I enjoyed it. But it was the easiest decision, actually, when it came to it, for me to leave and to go and live with my mum. But many people said to me, it's a big sacrifice for you to go and leave your job and to go and live with your mum. It's as if you're putting your life on hold. And I didn't see it that way. There were sacrifices, and I don't want to minimise those. We mentioned some earlier on in John's session, the sense of loss of identity. Had a role and I had a job description and I left that, and now what am I? I'm just a carer for one person. So there was a sense of loss of identity, definitely a loss of competence. In my job, I basically knew roughly what I was doing. When I became a carer, I didn't know what I was doing. It's a whole new world, a new system, new language, new groups of people to relate to. It's a sharp learning curve. So I found there was a loss of competence. Socially, there was losses for me as a carer. I wasn't mixing with my friends. I had limited opportunity to go out. So some of my freedoms were lost. And over time, conversation with Mum diminished, got smaller and smaller and smaller. We spent increasingly amount of meals just quiet, because conversation became something that she couldn't really do very much. But actually, that happened over a period of time, and I think I certainly grew to be able to take it because it happened gradually. But that was a loss of conversation with my mum. It meant I didn't share what was going on in my life with her in a way I used to do. So there were definitely losses, as well as the sort of practical things of sleep and energy. But I would say that there is a blessing in it as well. I didn't see it as this was my life on hold. I just saw it was a different chapter. It's a new chapter of my life, but it's still my life in relationship, because I'm relating to my mum. And I think giving and receiving love are two sides of a coin, and both of them are God-designed for our own sense of being human. Being human means that we both give love and receive love. And in giving, there is a receiving. Very often the one we're caring for does reciprocate in some ways in giving love to us back again. Can be very... that relationship can develop. Right? We shed tears together, we laughed together. And as time went on, we just sat silently and listened to the birds together. But there was a sort of togetherness about it that was beautiful, that was a blessing. I know that for some people that isn't the case. The person they're caring for perhaps doesn't reciprocate very much at all. But I think what I would want to say, if it feels a bit one-sided, is perhaps use that, what is a painful experience, to find in it ways to receive God's love for you and to receive your God's identity that he gives you. So I would say, yes, there is blessing within the difficulty. There is a blessing of being cared for. Someone mentioned the Apostle John earlier on, caring for Mary. And I think if you think about it from John's point of view, was it just Mary that benefited from that? I'm sure John also would have said, no, actually, I'm glad to have had Mary in my home. I guess there was ways in which he and his family benefited from having her there. There was a blessing for him as well as for Mary that he had Jesus' mother there. So if, as and when we all come to the stage of being cared for, just log in the back of your mind that it's not necessarily about being a burden to the other person. Don't assume that your relatives or your carer sees it that way. And don't deny them the opportunity of being blessed, of growing, of giving and receiving love, not just from you, but from the Lord. So those times with Mum in that last few years of her life gave me opportunity to reflect on life and what's important in life, what's meaningful in life, and to become more aware of God and God's presence as life slowed right down. Our time has gone. Thank you so much for your contributions and sharing. I'm sure that there's a lot more I'd love to hear. Perhaps over the next 24 hours or so we can connect over coffee and chat further. But thank you very much.